Distinguished guests, welcome to another episode of Life on the Grid, hosted by Kobe Lambeth and Ben Schneider. Tonight's guest, Ryan Myrehn from Indycar Radio, and music from Tough Guy with their new song, Way Out.
Here's the uptown Charlotte skyline from the WBTV webcam on a beautiful day in the month of May. Just a few days until things really get busy north of here when NASCAR returns to town for the Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte Motor Speedway. Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Life on the Grid. My name is Kobe Lambert from the Podium Finish, and with me is Ben Schneider from Grid Live Wrap Up. Ben, May is always one of the most exciting months in motorsports. The racing season is in full swing at this point. Championship battles starting to take shape, and we have great races that draw in a larger than normal audience. For much of our lives, we've truly been spoiled on Memorial Day weekend, to say the least. Breakfast in Monaco, lunch in Indy, dinner in Charlotte. The best day in motorsports, and I've gotten so used to this special tradition. However, it's looking a little bit different this year, with Monaco moving back a week. For those watching from the United States, it might be a little bittersweet or awesome, so you don't have to wake up as early to catch the Monaco Grand Prix on Memorial Day weekend. And the Indy 500 is back in the month of May after getting rescheduled to August last year due to the global pandemic. I remember when the news of last year's postponement was announced, there was a lot of disappointment and hurt all around. But we did end up having the race take place, thankfully, with Takuma Sato winning the Indy 500 for the second time. But this time it was different because they raced behind closed doors and in the month of August. And NASCAR heading to Charlotte for the Coca-Cola 600. This is usually the point of the season when we evaluate everyone's performance so far. We have a few drivers with multiple wins and a lot of drivers with one win. So definitely a lot of parity this year in the NASCAR Cup Series. Ben, how does it feel to have all crown jewel races back in the month of May, a year after the pandemic disrupted the entire racing schedule around the world?
Well, it feels fantastic, and I really feel like we're finally starting to turn a little bit of a corner here as more and more people get vaccinated, things continue to open up. I know here in Delaware, they're lifting the statewide mask mandate on Friday, capacities back to close to 100%. So I don't think we're quite back to a pre-COVID world yet, but we seem to be getting there. And certainly great to have the races back in the month of May. I know I like you, I've always enjoyed Memorial Day weekend. I've called it my third favorite day of the year after Christmas and Easter, having three great races all on the same day. But I've got to say, I think it's nice in a way to have Monaco a week earlier now so that it doesn't clash with the Indy 500. I know it's not going to happen this year, probably not going to happen for a couple of years, but it might open the door for somebody to do something like what Fernando Alonso did a couple of years ago, and that skipped the Monaco Grand Prix when he was having a really down year with McLaren, and try to come over and run the Indianapolis 500. If the 500 can tweak their qualifying schedule a little bit, maybe we could see somebody try to pull off both since they're not on the same day anymore. But I'm really looking forward to all three races this year, particularly the Indy 500. I know every year it seems that the hype just continues to build more and more for me as a race fan. And I'm not going to lie, there's something different about last year. I just couldn't get into it as much just because of everything that was going on in the world and the fact that there were no fans in the stands. I'm thankful that they found a way to have the race, which I think was better than the alternative of not having the race at all. But, I think Alexander Rossi said something very, very good last year. Very insightful. He said that for the sake of the person winning the race, I hope that it's somebody that has won it before, so that they know what the experience is like, in front of 250,000 fans or however many it is when you get a full crowd there. It would have been really unfortunate if somebody who's been working for their entire lives to be in that position to win the Indianapolis 500, then they do it, and we're in the middle of a global pandemic and there are no fans there to celebrate. So I'm glad it was Sato last year, since he had already gotten to experience it. And hopefully, I know we've got a reduced crowd this year, but the fans will come back and be strong in spirit. And hopefully we never have to deal with anything like what we had to deal with last year again.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully, we never have to deal with anything like that again, or at least in our lifetimes, because it might be another global pandemic. Hopefully, not for another 100 years. So we'll get to enjoy all of the action at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway during the month of May, from moving forward. And I do think that was definitely a great point from Alexander Rossi. Hopefully that someone who had won in the past would win the race last year. And Sato was a former winner. He got to experience all of the pop and circumstance that comes with winning the Indy 500. So it wasn't like a new driver, and you went in front of basically an empty house. Nobody's there but the personnel at the racetrack, and it would have and like a young driver, let's say Renus VK, Alex Palou, for example, if they were able to win the Indy 500 last year, no fans in the stands, then their experience of winning that great race would have certainly been tainted. And this year, although not 100% back to normal, we'll have some fans in the stands, 135,000 strong. Really exciting. We're starting to turn a corner with the pandemic, and hopefully things continue to look upwards. And also wanted to hit on one point you mentioned about the Monaco Grand Prix moving back. Might not happen soon, but maybe years down the road it could open up the door for an active Formula One driver to attempt the Indy 500. And if that were to happen, I'd say maybe consider moving the Monaco Grand Prix back 2 weeks, because one week beforehand they wouldn't be able to participate in qualifying, and your Indy 500 fate would depend on another driver qualifying your car for the greatest spectacle in racing. I think it would be really important for, if any active Formula One driver wanted to run the Indy 500, they definitely probably want to participate in practice and qualifying as well to prepare for the race, because this is definitely a really hard race to win. And I know Fernando Alonso said it when he came over to run the Indy 500. He basically said that you either needed to run all the ovals or run the entire season. And at his point in his career, Fernando wasn't really willing to buy in and learn a new championship. And it really seems like if you're a Formula One driver who wants to try to do a one-off at the Indy 500, it might be a tall task to come over here and win.
Yeah, it's funny. I know we're going to talk a lot of sports car racing with Ryan coming up here. I almost feel like Montoya, being in an LMP2 car, I feel like he's in a way closer to the Triple Crown now than Alonso is, with him being back in Formula One. The next time he's going to get a shot is going to be 2023 at the earliest. And like you were mentioning, I don't even know if he really has any interest in coming to run the IndyCar series full time. I was very surprised. If he was serious about the Triple Crown, I would have thought that he would take on the IndyCar series and try to run the full schedule, or at least run, more than just the Indianapolis 500. Because I think if you want to be serious about it, you definitely have to consider attempting multiple races and really finding your footing in the series. And him coming over to just do Indy, every year or every other year, like he's been doing, even missing the race in 2019, it makes me question, how serious he really was about trying to get the Triple Crown.
Yeah, yes, definitely a lot of questions have come out about Fernando Alonso and his commitment to the series. I did bring up the fact that he said you basically gotta go all in if you want to win the Indy 500. It's going to be really hard for you to come straight out of Formula One and hop in that Indy car and think you're going to go out there and win on your first attempt or whatever, because you're going to either have to run some other ovals, get used to the ebbs and flows of oval racing in the NTT IndyCar series, or just run the full season so you can get to know the car in general. And I feel like if Fernando Alonso had done that and ran an IndyCar full time, his chances of winning the greatest spectacle in racing would have went up by a lot, rather than just trying to do a one-off drive.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think he had a great shot in 2017 when he basically had an Andretti car. McLaren got the Andretti partnership. I know the Honda engine wasn't as reliable, unfortunately, something he had to deal a lot with in Formula One, ironically. But, just a complete disaster when he came back 2 years later with McLaren as a more independent team. I know they got a little bit of help from Carlin, but then again, Carlin isn't, the powerhouse that Andretti is either. So, we'll see if he decides to come back. But, like I said, he's got at least a couple years in Formula One now. So it's going to be a little while.
Well, Ben, I think it's time to introduce this month's guest. With it being the month of May, I felt that it would be really appropriate to invite someone with ties to the NTT IndyCar series. He's a motorsports broadcaster for Indycar Radio and SRO GT World Challenge America, also a podcast host and contributor at Sportscar 365. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Ryan Myrehn. Ryan, how are you doing this evening?
Hey guys, doing great. Happy to come on and talk some racing with you folks.
Yeah, definitely really excited to talk about racing with you. And we understand the month of May is very busy for you, obviously, being on site at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So we greatly appreciate you for finding the time to be here with us tonight. Ryan, I know you through social media for several years now. I'm really excited to finally see you now virtually, and in the future, maybe I can see you in person at the racetrack. And I've always thought very highly of your work and respect everything that you've been able to accomplish in your career up to this point. I bet the day you learned that you were going to be a part of IndyCar Radio broadcast team was a special one for you, covering the NTT IndyCar series, all the exciting races, the stars of the series, and of course, the granddad of them all, the Indianapolis 500. It must feel incredibly special to have the opportunity to cover the greatest spectacle in racing, not just once, but multiple times. And here's my first question for you. How did you get your foot in the door with IndyCar Radio, and what's been the most memorable moment working there so far?
That's a great question, and certainly it's great to chat with you as well. I'll get to your question in just a second, but I want to say that it's been fun kind of following you as well, Kobe, as you've progressed in your career. And again, congratulations on your college graduation here recently. And I love what you guys do. I've been following what you've been doing with this program over the last several months, and a big passion project of mine is to bring all different forms of motorsports together. And that seems to be what you guys are doing as well. And so I absolutely love it. Glad to be a part of it. As far as how the IndyCar Radio started, to be honest, that is what I was gunning for when I wanted to get into media. I mean, I went to college at DePaul University. Over this shoulder, there it is. You can see the flag there, and chose the school because it had a great college radio station. And my idea, pretty much from day one, was if one day I could work in the pit lane on the IndyCar Radio broadcast of an Indianapolis 500, then I'd succeeded. That was all I ever wanted to do. So everything I did through college was done with an eye on getting there. Everything I did early in my professional broadcasting career was done with an eye on getting there as well. And it really did start in college, actually. I had no real connections to anyone in the motorsports industry, but thankfully, the wife of Mike King, who at the time was the chief announcer for the IMS radio network, it was a fellow DePaul alumna. And through her, my faculty advisor at the school got me in touch with her. She put me in touch with Mike. He actually came and visited me at school my senior year and gave me a chance to shadow effectively their broadcast on qualifying weekend and then for the 500 itself. That was back in 2011. So was able to make some connections there. Met Wally Levitt, who at the time was the network general manager, recently retired. And, that was a good contact to have. Nick Yeoman as well, who continues on the radio network. Mark Janes, who's now the chief announcer. Met them and several others during that opportunity in May of 2011. And just stayed in contact with them as my career progressed. And finally, I got to a point where I felt I had some material I could send to them and wouldn't be embarrassed by, and basically asked for a shot at a tryout. And they gave me that chance at Road America in 2016. That's led to a couple different opportunities starting in 2017. I did my first race for the network at Barber of 17. And then my first 500 was in 2018. And you asked what the most memorable moment was. And without a doubt, it was being introduced for the first time on an Indy 500 radio broadcast. It was the culmination of years of work and just the most surreal moment. And I'm really glad that when Mark threw down to me, it was for a pre-recorded segment. So I was a bundle of nerves and a bundle of emotions at that time. And I'm glad it wasn't live because I'm not quite sure what would have come out of my mouth.
Wow, that's definitely a great memory right there. I can imagine what it must feel like, covering your first Indy 500 in person and being on IndyCar Radio of them all. That's definitely a massive accomplishment right there. And as you know, in the United States, we're starting to enter a new phase of the global pandemic here. Cases are starting to come down, restrictions being lifted, those mask mandates are disappearing. Life seems to be returning to normal slowly but surely. With state restrictions being lifted, Memorial Day weekend is going to be huge for us down here in North Carolina. Charlotte Motor Speedway announced that they're going to be open at 100% capacity for NASCAR's longest race, the Coca-Cola 600, and for the Indy 500. The speedways open up to 40% capacity, I believe, around the maximum of 135,000 fans. The pandemic has impacted the motorsports community in so many different ways. Racing behind closed doors, mask mandates, media having less access to the drivers at the track, which really hurt their ability to truly tell the stories each and every week. Figuring out Zoom, WebEx, and all of those crazy things, you name it. And from your perspective, what's it been like covering motorsports during a global pandemic, especially when racing returned to action last summer?
Well, it's been different. There's no question about that. I'm just grateful we found a way to get back to racing when we did. I know on the NASCAR side, they got a bit of a head start on us, both in IndyCar and sports car racing, where I spend most of my time. But the wait was a long one, and when we got back to it, I was ready to jump through whatever hoops I needed to in order to get back to work. I think that was the hardest part, was having my livelihood come to a halt and have no idea when it was going to come back. Luckily, it did, and we've been able to find a way to keep it going. And I'm really grateful for all the sanctioning bodies and the different tracks and everyone involved in trying to find a way to make this possible. But it has been different, and you say it's been tough figuring out Zoom. I'm still not sure I have. There's a lot of things like this that I haven't quite totally figured out, and maybe I'll have it figured out by the time we don't need it anymore. We'll see. But, it definitely just complicates things. Access is difficult to come by. Just building those relationships, face-to-face conversations are a huge part of what we do. And not being able to have those makes it for a challenge, no question. Even something as simple as being able to read a facial expression of somebody that you're interviewing. That's such an important component of doing an interview, especially in a very difficult situation. If someone has crashed out or what have you, to have that to play off of, to provide the context, well, that's gone when you've got the masks on, and finding ways to communicate what you would normally communicate with your facial expression, maybe with tone, or just using your eyes to do this. I mean, that was my challenge last year. So, yeah, it was not easy. It was difficult. I'm glad it seems like we're turning a corner. I certainly hope that's the case. I'm thrilled that we'll have up to 135,000 fans at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, because, Kobe, I'll tell you, being there, one of the lucky few last year for the 500 run behind closed doors, and standing on the grid as they did the driver introductions, effectively just for the TV cameras, not having any fans in the stands. It was the most surreal and frankly depressing moment in my career, I think it's safe to say. And boy, I hope we never have to go through anything like that again. I'm thrilled that there will at least be some fans in the stands, and I look forward to the day we can have an Indy 500 with a packed set of grandstands, a packed infield, bring the snake pit back, the whole kit and caboodle. I can't wait until that becomes a reality. But for now, I'm just thrilled we can have what we can.
Yeah, definitely thrilled to have what we can. And it was really crazy watching that on TV last year, the Indianapolis 500, and looking at the grandstands completely empty. I was like, this is so surreal and crazy, because I never expected to see anything like that in my life. I know some fans really wanted to see the action. I think they lined up outside of the track. I think one guy, he was able to climb to a higher elevation to be able to see the action. It just shows you have to respect the passion from those race fans, because they truly eat, sleep, and breathe motorsports. And it was just really unfortunate that things happened the way it did. But we still had an Indy 500 last year, not in the month of May, but in the month of August. It felt kind of strange, but at the end of the day, still got the show in. And this year, it seems like the pandemic is starting to turn a corner, as you said, and maybe in 2022 we can have a full house again, or if not, then 2023. And it's just really good to see some fans back at the Speedway this year. And at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, there's been so much history in the last century there. 2.5-mile oval, 200 laps, 500 miles, and one winner at the end of the day. And that winner gets their face on the Borg Warner Trophy. Traditions such as listening to the singing of Back Home Again in Indiana, and watching the winner drink the milk in Victory Lane, or in some cases, pour the milk all over themselves. Thinking of all the names who have won the greatest spectacle in racing: AJ Foyt, Mario Andretti, the Unsers. Oh, the Unsers have quite a legacy at the racetrack. Al Singer, Lil Al, also rest in peace to the late Bobby Unser, who passed away. Johnny Rutherford, Emerson Fittipaldi, Dario Franchitti, and many more legends. Ryan, what's so special about the Indianapolis 500 that draws in viewers all over the world every year on Memorial Day weekend?
Boy, that is a good question. I'm not sure there is just a single answer to it, if we're being honest. I think it's different for everybody. I'm a native Hoosier. I grew up primarily in Indianapolis. My family did move around, but we always seem to come back to Indy. And there's something for especially the locals. I think this is our event. And for Indianapolis as a city, prior to really the 80s when the Colts came to town, yes, you had the ABA Pacers, which were very successful in their own right and had some big names and did have some recognition. But generally speaking, the one major event that the city was known for was hosting the Indianapolis 500 every year. And there's a sense of community and civic pride that comes with that I think even as a young person, I understood this is special. And in fact, when I was really young, when I first through third grade, my family actually lived in Japan. And that was one thing you'd say to somebody in Japan, well, I'm from Indianapolis. Oh, that's where the Indianapolis 500 is. And so I guess it got impressed on me pretty early that this is something that is big outside of just our little bubble here in the Midwest. But, you ask that question to 10 people and you probably get 10 different answers. Most of them have been coming for generations. I mean, their families can trace it back. That's another cool thing for me. And that moment I talked about earlier, being introduced on the radio broadcast for the first time, I was thinking about the stories that my grandparents had told me about their parents going to the race in the 20s, listening to the race the first years of the radio broadcast in the early 50s and all through their lifetime. And it's something that gets passed down from family member to family member. I think in recent years, the racing has been excellent. And that really was not part of it most of the time, really until I would argue from 2011 on, we've had excellent races year after year. But I think only in the last 10, 15 years or so has that become the norm. Traditionally, you would have winners winning by multiple laps in some instances, only 5 or 6 cars finishing on the lead lap, but people still came. So now you throw on top of all the great traditions, on top of the heritage, on top of the prestige, the fact that it's been some of the most compelling racing you'll find anywhere in the world, and it happens to be on the biggest stage. I think that too adds to the allure and part of the appeal for so many. But it's hard to put a single finger on one thing that makes this event that attractive to so many people. But clearly there's something about it because they've been coming for over 100 years now.
Yes, the Indianapolis 500 is such a special event. I really admire all of the history, and I believe my first Indy 500 was the 2011 Indy 500, and that was a really good one to watch. You think this young American driver J.R. Hildebrand is going to win what the greatest race in America, and then coming out of turn 4, he smashes the wall. And out of nowhere, here comes Dan Weldon to win the race. That was such a spectacular finish, and it's really funny in a way for me because my first race in NASCAR was the 2007 Daytona 500. They had the big crash. They had the big crash on the last lap, and it was a drag race between Kevin Harvick and Mark Martin. And then my very first Indy 500, J.R. Hildebrand crashes out of the lead, and Dan Weldon takes Brian Herta's team to victory lane in the greatest spectacle in racing. So it's really ironic that my first NASCAR, my first IndyCar race that I ever watched produced 2 really spectacular finishes.
Next thing you're going to tell me the 2016 24 Hours of Le Mans was your first Le Mans you ever watched. That's the one where the Toyota broke down on the last lap. Was that your fault too?
No, it was not. That was that was definitely not my first 24 hours of Le Mans.
Okay.
I have to go back and look at the dates and figure out which one was my first, but I really enjoyed the 24 hours of Le Mans. Speaking of sports car racing, it seems like Ben's gonna rejoin to talk a little sports car racing with you while I take a quick break.
Yeah, Ryan, it's great to meet you and get to talk with you tonight. I know you're very busy this time of year, so I appreciate you taking time out this evening.
No problem. Pleasure is mine. I'm always happy to talk racing, sports cars, IndyCar, NASCAR, whatever. I'm happy. If it's got a motor and wheels, I'm in.
Yeah, well, I know Kobe just talked with you about the IndyCar side of things, but you've also built up quite an impressive resume in sports car racing. I understand you just received a big promotion this year in SRO America. You started off as a pit reporter for the GT World Challenge America Sports Car Races. Now you're the lead broadcaster alongside Calvin Fish, replacing one of the longtime voice of the series, Greg Kramer. What went through your mind when you were first told that you'd be calling the races in the booth?
I was surprised, to say the least, and you say one of the longtime voices in Greg Kramer. There have been others, but by and large, it's been him for 2 decades of what was first the Speed Vision challenge, or actually might have had a name, Escort Challenge or something like that even beforehand, but it's gone through several names, Pirelli World Challenge, and now it's part of the SRO group and has the top series is known as GT World Challenge America, as you mentioned. And I still associate the series with Greg. And I will say right off the bat, he has been a tremendous mentor. He's the only reason I got a shot at being the pit reporter in the first place. And so when the news came to me, my emotions were very mixed because on one hand, I was absolutely thrilled. What an opportunity. I think this is a series on the uptake. Certainly the top series, GT World Challenge America, the car count has been down in recent years, but it's trending up. But the other series within the SRO America umbrella, we've got GT America, which is new this year. Interesting mix of GT3 and GT4 cars, and I think has been quite compelling. Pirelli GT4 America, I think, is tremendous racing and has been for several years. And then the touring car classes in TC America is great too. So all of this to say, there was a lot of excitement because I feel like there is a lot of reason to be optimistic about the future of the series. But on the other hand, I will admit to feeling quite conflicted because Greg is a friend, a mentor, and I hated that it came at his expense. But changes were made behind the scenes, and I'm glad they thought of me when they were. And hopefully, I've been able to step into the role and live up to the legacy that Greg created. I think we all kind of are living in his shadow and will be for a very long time. So hopefully we can do it justice. But anyway, that's the best answer I can give. It was a complicated time, to say the least, and not quite sure how I should feel about it. But I will say the first 2 weekends of the season I've really enjoyed, especially this most recent one at Circuit of the Americas, where I could work side by side with my friend Calvin Fish. He had to miss the first one, unfortunately, because of kidney stones. So I had a rotating cast of characters, including the great John Watson, who won Penske's first Formula One race, by the way. He was my co-host for some of the races at Sonoma, but great to have Calvin with me at COTA and for the rest of the year.
Oh, it's great to hear, but that's off to a great start for you. And I understand you've also done many of the marquee endurance sports car races, such as Rolex 24, 12 Hours of Sebring and Petit Le Mans, the Crown Jewels in IMSA, and also other international events such as 24 Hours of Le Mans and Spa. You've worked really hard and are now able to say that you've covered all of them. What do you love the most about sports car racing, and what are some of your favorite memories covering those races?
Well, I love sports car racing because of the diversity that it brings. I mean, where else can you see, first of all, prototypes and GT cars running together, but even within those categories, right? You've got, looking at the IMSA DPI class, you've got the Mazda, at least for the rest of this year, little 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. The Acura's got the V6 with the turbo, the naturally aspirated V8 of the Cadillacs. And then you go into the GT classes, and it's even more varied. The cars look different. They sound different. The soundtrack to a sports car race is so unique, and I love that. And I also love the really long races, just watching things play out over a long period of time. I compare it to watching a golf tournament, where if you're tuning into a golf tournament looking for excitement at every second of the way, you're probably going to leave disappointed. But the joy and the payoff is watching the tournament develop over 4 days. You get to the final day, you've seen the movers, you've seen the comers and goers, and now you've got this great duel coming down to the wire after 4 days of competition. Similar story, I think, in a 24-hour race where you have the ebbs and flows, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, right, that show up in a sports car race. And it's amazing in this modern era how many times a 24-hour race might come down to the last lap, as I referenced at Le Mans 2016 just a little while ago. So I absolutely love the sport. I think it's underserved. I wish there were more people paying attention to it, and it does seem to be on the rise, which is encouraging. The future of it looks great, especially in the prototype ranks with some of the new regulations coming in, although it's incumbent upon the different sanctioning bodies to get it right. I think we might talk more about that later. But as far as some of my favorite memories, I think number one, actually, is probably getting the last-minute call to go work the Total 24 Hours of Spa back in 2019. It was actually the morning of my wedding. I got an email that I need to book my travel now, like not after the wedding, but now, to try and get over to Europe. And so I'm putting everything on hold as we try and get the venue ready to go and trying to find a way to book my flight to get over to Belgium somehow, showing up a couple of weeks later, because that's all it was, being super jet lagged. The first couple of days were the two hottest days in Belgian history in succession. And then the race, it just rained cats and dogs the whole time. I was on the overnight stint. I was exhausted. I had no idea where I was. Most of the people I could barely communicate with, but was just loving every minute of it. That was definitely a highlight. Getting to Le Mans, I still can't believe I can say I've been there. And I was fortunate to go twice for Sports Car 365, and just getting to see the pomp and circumstance pre-race at Le Mans. It's unlike anything outside of the Indy 500. Those two races to me are on their own level as far as the prestige and the reverence with which the competitors and spectators alike, how they think about their participation in that particular event. I'd say those are probably the things that stand out above the rest.
Yeah, that's a nice segue. I remember watching 24 Hours of Le Mans broadcast, I think a couple of years ago now, and they were debating whether or not this is the greatest race or if the Indy 500 is the greatest race. And I'm still relatively new to sports cars in terms of what I've been following, and I'm thinking to myself, well, okay, you've got the two Toyotas here that can win overall, and realistically speaking, unless they take each other out or something, that's it. You go to Indianapolis, you've got 25 cars that, without a doubt, if things go their way, could win the Indianapolis 500. So that to me maybe gives the Indianapolis 500 an edge. But I know it's a really exciting time in sports car racing. We have a new prototype formula coming in with Le Mans Hypercar and Le Mans Daytona. In the World Endurance Championship, Toyota, of course, fielding their two LMH prototypes. A little bit of trouble with the Spa-Francorchamps season opener because the LMP2s were so close in performance. I think people knew that the hypercar would be a little bit slower than the old LMP1, but what some might consider a setback. There's still a lot of buzz about the future of prototype racing. Future programs coming from Peugeot, Ferrari, Acura, Audi, Porsche. So how exciting is it in terms of being a sports car fan right now when you consider everything that's going on?
This is a great time. I have to say, this is the first time, again, if this is done right, and that's really the key caveat here, but the first time that we've seen real alignment between the Premier North American Series, which is today the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship, and the Premier European Series, which is today the FIA World Endurance Championship. But it's the first time we've seen that kind of cooperation in the top class, really going back to the early days of the American Le Mans Series and the ability of American teams to go and race their top-level prototypes at the 24 Hours of Le Mans and at other sports car races in Europe. But I think this has a chance to be even more than that. The influx in manufacturers is huge, and sports car racing has always been cyclical in this way, where you'll have periods of time in which there's tons of manufacturers. I think the late 90s and early 2000s are a great example of this. Inevitably, they spin themselves into oblivion, and it fades away a little bit, and then it has to slowly build its way back up. And we're definitely on the upswing right now. What I think is going to be crucial, you mentioned there are two different set of prototype regulations. We're seeing the Le Mans Hypercar debuting this year. That is one side of it. And then the LMDH, which is coming in a couple of years, brings a completely different philosophy behind prototype racing to the party, and somehow, some way, they're going to have to be balanced. And there are big-time manufacturers on both sides of the divide, and that actually is what gives me the most hope that they will have some success in balancing the two, because if you slight one, you are slighting a major manufacturer, Ferrari, Peugeot, Toyota on one hand, Porsche, Audi, and Honda on the other, at least that have been announced. I think you can expect to get an announcement out of Cadillac very soon that they will be continuing, or at least out of GM. I expect it to be continuing as a Cadillac, but I suppose it could be something else like Chevrolet or Corvette's been bandied about. But I think the leader in the clubhouse for that would be Cadillac to continue. And it does sound like there's even greater interest with more manufacturers kicking the tires on LMDH. So all of this to say, if they can find a way to create some parity between the two, then this will be a high watermark, certainly in my lifetime, for prototype racing when LMDH begins in 2023. And don't forget that coincides with the 100th anniversary of the first running of the 24 Hours of Le Mans. That's a huge incentive for manufacturers to step up and be there and have a chance to compete on that historic occasion. That is the one event that's hanging out there in the future that I just cannot wait to see. I think it's going to be a historic day. And again, if done properly, this could be a real golden age.
Yeah, I know there's so many great manufacturers in both IMSA and in the World Endurance Championship. I know it's been kind of unfortunate to see Toyota really hasn't had too much competition over the last few years, but it certainly sounds like sports car racing's on the upswing, and it's going to be great to see where it goes here in the coming next few years.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that no one is more disappointed that they haven't had competition than Toyota. This is a brand that does embrace competition everywhere that they compete. And I think they were very disappointed to see Audi and Porsche leave LMP1. I think they were very disappointed because they were quick to sign up for LMH. As soon as Hypercar was announced, more or less, Toyota was like, yep, we'll be there. Bring on all comers. And they've been really flexible with letting the rules get tweaked for instance, when Aston Martin was committed. That ultimately fell through, but Aston Martin came in with the idea of creating a hypercar based on their road-going Valkyrie actual hypercar, road-going hypercar. And so that created a new tweak to the rules that wasn't initially there. And Toyota said, okay, we'll do whatever we need to have some real competition. And so while what happened at Spa here recently with what has to be described as some of the most blatant sandbagging that we've seen in recent memory probably did leave a bad taste in people's mouths. And I think people also grew tired of watching Toyota dominate the privateers in the last days of LMP1. In general, I think Toyota deserves a great deal of credit for seeking out competition, adapting in order to maintain competition, and then just sticking it out. When they really had no one to compete against, they stuck it out. And I hate to imagine the scenario that would have played out had Toyota dropped out of the WEC after Porsche and Audi pulled the plug. I don't think it's unrealistic to say that we might not have a World Endurance Championship if they had done so. And so despite some of the shenanigans here in recent months, I think Toyota ought to be commended for their continued commitment to sports car racing, because I think what we'd be talking about right now would be very, very different if they had gone a different direction.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of great stuff to talk about in the sports car world right now. And I think Kobe's going to come back in here in just a second. And yeah, there he is. And he'll continue talking with you about that a little bit and then go into a segue about motorsports journalism.
Sounds great. Good talking with you, Ben.
Yes, we'll give Ben a little breather here, and really enjoyed listening to all of that wonderful discussions about sports car racing. And before getting to talking about journalism, I want to piggyback off of what you guys were saying and looking at everything in regards to LMH and LMDH. I do think there's a lot to be excited about. In my opinion, I think we could really be entering a new golden era for prototype racing if this all works out as expected. And Ben literally just listed all the different programs coming on board with all of the manufacturers, and that's really exciting. Plus, you said could get some news from General Motors at some point in the future about their prototype future. Is it going to be a Cadillac, or are we going to see a Corvette LMDH? And what's going to happen with the GT program with Corvette? It seems like they're getting the ball rolling with the GTD Pro program, but we'll have to wait and see what happens with the future of GM and sports car racing. And yes, I do think there's a ton of great potential in general, but I am a little skeptical, if I'm being honest with you, mostly due to how everything turned out last time. IMSA and the ACO tried to come up with a common set of prototype regulations. You already know when Grand Am and the American Le Mans Series merged, the top class consisted of Daytona prototype, LMP2, and who can forget the infamous Delta Wing? I honestly miss that car. That's probably my greatest sports car racing unpopular opinion. I really like the Delta Wing, and it's a shame that it finally got competitive at the end of its cycle. Really would have liked to see it stay on a few more years and see if it could truly compete for race wins. And the current DPI regulations replace that era of prototypes. Originally, we all thought DPI would be allowed to compete in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, alongside the other LMP2 cars with engine and manufacturer styling cues. Then the rules changed again with the DPI teams. They could use the manufacturer-specific engines, but here's the catch. They had to use the standard LMP2 bodywork. For example, a Cadillac DPI team would be allowed to keep the engine, but they had to use the Dallara aero kit instead. And after that, DPI wasn't allowed to compete at Le Mans after all, with the next era set to solve what didn't happen last time around. It seems like we're in a wait and see phase. I remember what Mike Shanks said about 5-6 years ago when he switched from the Ford DP to the Ligier LMP2 HPD car. His dream as a car owner would be able to put a car on a plane and race it around the world with LMH and LMDH. It seems like something like this could really happen. The dream could become a reality with both sets of prototypes going for the overall win. Imagine the IMSA teams like Action Express, Wayne Taylor Racing flying down the Mulsanne Straight and sweeping through the Porsche curse, challenging the WC regulars. Then in return, Toyota Gazoo Racing, Peugeot, Ferrari, shifting through the gears through NASCAR 3 and 4, heading into the Tribal at Daytona International Speedway, taking the fight to all of those IMSA teams. At the moment, LMDH will be allowed to compete in WC events, including the 24 Hours of Le Mans, but still haven't heard any word on IMSA's final decision yet if LMH can run in their events. Is it fair to be skeptical about all of these good possibilities becoming a reality given what happened last time around?
Yes, and not just because of what happened last time, but there is a long history of this, and I think it's worth noting that with DPI going to Le Mans, that was in an era in which LMP1 was still in rude health, LMP2 was doing quite well. Frankly, the ACO and the FIA and the whole World Endurance Championship didn't really feel like they needed DPI, and it was going to add further complication. I think the biggest difference and the reason that we're seeing this now is they're really the WEC does need the U.S. manufacturers that are only interested. I shouldn't say the U.S. manufacturers, but the manufacturers that are only interested in what is really IMSA's idea for the next step of prototype racing, which is LMDH. So I think the thing that gives me a little bit of hope is that there is a need on the other side of the pond for these cars to come over to provide some increased competition. Maybe there's a lesson learned as well from what's happened in the past. But you talk about, that dream of having a car that you could take on a plane and go race anywhere in the world. We've seen this be successful with GT3. I think that's what makes GT3 as strong as it is globally, because you can do exactly that with only small tweaks to electronics or tires, brakes. I mean, small little differences depending on the championship, but by and large, the car you run in IMSA GTD right now, you could run it in any SRO series. You can run it in GT Masters. You can run it in International GT Open. You can run it in British GT. I mean, I'm just to name a few. So I think there is now, even more so than 5 or 6 years ago, a blueprint for how this works, why this works, and I hope that it does happen. But not only am I a little concerned that perhaps the rug could get pulled out from under the IMSA side of things again, which, like you mentioned, did happen before and has happened before that too. I'm more concerned, quite frankly, in finding a way to make the two platforms equal. I'm really skeptical that there's going to be an easy way. You mentioned DPI and LMP2 running together. Those two were much, much, much more similar to one another than LMH and LMDH are going to be to one another. So the sanctioning bodies and the technical groups have a lot of work ahead of them, but I think they know what rides on this. If they get it right, you said it, it's a golden era, no question. To be able to have a Peugeot or a Ferrari come and run at Daytona, and to have Wayne Taylor take their Cadillac, or I guess it's an Acura now, over to Le Mans, and the big names from the States go run over there. I mean, it's good for everyone. We need this. The sport needs it to lift itself up, and a high tide lifts all boats. Hopefully they can see this as well and find a way to make it work. And if they do, they'll be reaping the benefits for many years to come.
Yes, definitely. Everyone's really hoping that they're going to get this right, and you bring up a good point about balance of performance. And I think it's going to be a little bit different this time than we saw in the other era, trying to balance the Daytona prototypes and the LMP2s. They did the best that they could, but it just never really worked out. How everyone expected to, and rightfully so. Two different types of prototypes, and still here, LMH, LMDH, still two different type of prototypes, and hopefully IMSA, the ACO, will find a way to balance those because, as you said, if they get it right, it's going to be a really special age for sports car racing. And when looking at events like the Rolex 24 at the beginning of each year, it's like an all-star event. You have drivers in IMSA, WEC, Asian Le Mans Series, European Le Mans Series, and also stars in IndyCar, NASCAR, Formula One, Formula E, all of those series. It's like an all-star event, and if they were able to get the prototype formula right, where you have all of those manufacturers come in, it could get even bigger. I mean, it's already big at the beginning of the year. Rolex 24 kicking off the motorsports season, and just getting that prototype formula right, that's going to be key. And an already big event to kick off the year is going to get even bigger. And when it comes time for the 24 Hours of Le Mans, as you mentioned, 100 years, there's a lot riding on 2023. So we're hoping they get that right, and then it might be one year that we are never going to forget. And shifting gears now, looking at motorsports journalism, I think it's certainly an interesting industry. Ironically, I didn't know what I wanted to do until I was 16 years old. John DeGeese and Sports Car 365 is actually the reason why I wanted to get into motorsports coverage. Before heading off to high school each morning, I'd read the latest news in sports car racing on Sports Car 365 during breakfast, and I felt fascinated by journalism from that point forward. I always tried to model my riding style after John's because I thought he had the perfect formula with his words. While we currently aren't focusing on writing articles here at Grid Network, we hope to build up our outlet into something credible and respectable inside the motorsports industry over a period of time. And I do understand it takes a lot of time, commitment, hard work, and perseverance. How hard is it to really find your footing in this business, and what advice can you provide to any aspiring motorsports journalists out there listening tonight?
Great questions, and it's still strange to me that I'm in any way qualified to answer them because I feel like I'm still figuring it out, but I'll do my best. As far as how to get your foot in the door, I mean, it's all about trying to make a connection. And being able to accept that you're going to be rejected or just flat out ignored more often than not. In fact, the rejections are probably even more infrequent than the success stories. It's the being ignored that you encounter more often than not. But for me, it was just a case of trying to be at the racetrack as much as possible in some capacity in order to meet the people that one day you'd like to work for. And I know that my foot in the door with 365, which really was what got me into motorsports, I had worked while doing local radio. I'd worked at local racetracks as a PA announcer, but that really wasn't interconnected with what I wanted to be doing. But I was working at the time at a radio station in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I got credentialed to the Detroit Grand Prix and went down there, basically just trying to meet people. And I had done this at several other events as well. I went to the NASCAR race at Gateway the first time the trucks came back. And I went to IndyCar race at Iowa just to have my face around, just to try and meet people. It's the personal connections that really make it possible to get into a business like this. And I met Tony DeZino at Detroit. John was actually over at Le Mans, but I got through Tony John's contact information and basically cold emailed him, which rarely works, but I pitched him on a podcast. This is before everybody and their grandmother had a podcast. And somehow he said yes, and that was in 2016, and we got started with that. And that really that was crucial for me because it eventually got me to the racetrack. Then I started writing for him, and I got to the racetrack even more. When I was at the tracks, sometimes IMSA was on the same weekend as IndyCar. I'm talking to my IndyCar Radio connections. Okay, you're going to be here already? Well, we've got an opening. Can you help out? That opened that door there. Same thing on the TV side. Total happenstance, but talk to Greg Kramer in the media center at COTA one time, kind of explained my story, what I wanted to do, and next thing you know, they're looking for someone to do a tryout, and I did my first TV hit ever. I mean, I'd never done TV when they gave me a shot at a touring car race out at Laguna Seca back in 2017. So be persistent. Be prepared to work for basically nothing or even nothing for a little while. Eventually, you got to quit doing that. But but that does help open some doors. And try to be present. Meeting people face to face makes it a lot harder for them to ignore you when you send them an email asking if they need any help for something. That's the best advice that I can give. I think you had a second part to that question, and I forgot what it was. I'm not sure I answered it.
Oh, definitely. You answered the question. In any given industry, you'll certainly have good moments and sometimes bad ones. Good moments like your position in the booth calling the SRO America races, or bad moments like me losing out on 2 internship opportunities last year because the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was really hard, but I'm working hard to recover from that. And another example of something bad would be telling your employer a great idea that you have that could really push the business forward, but the employer immediately rejecting your idea and insulting your intelligence, making you feel bad about yourself and your abilities. And in this world, I understand you need to have a thick skin and you can't let every little thing bother you. And I know it's easier said than done. Sometimes we learn more about ourselves and grow by making mistakes, getting rejected, having someone in your face with a blunt assessment, and a lot of other things that might make us feel uncomfortable. Has something negative ever happened to you in your career that shaped you into the motorsports broadcaster that you are today?
Yeah, lots of things, I guess, but if I'm looking for, and it's hard to even say it's necessarily a negative, but I think the thing that got me as motivated as I've become, and to enjoy the process of it, because I guess to go back to it, what you see or hear from us on air is just a fraction of the work that goes into the job. And there is a copious amount of note taking that goes into being prepared for a broadcast. And if you don't really love it, you're not going to put in the hours to do it. And I think what gave me the motivation to grind through the hours of prep that it takes is just being on the outside looking in for a number of years. In reality, my wait to make it probably wasn't all that long, but in the moment, it felt like I was so far away from what I wanted to do, and I just couldn't figure out what I needed to do to get there. And so working for 3 years at a radio station in Missouri, then a couple of years up in the UP at a different radio station, and watching people my age, people I knew who got a chance at it that I never got. You don't want to say you're jealous. That doesn't sound right, because especially for people that I respected, I was happy for them. But there was just this gnawing in my stomach that, man, what would I give to get that opportunity, just to get a chance at it and see if I could make it stick. And those years of doing jobs that were good to prepare me, but weren't really what I wanted to be doing. If there comes a day where I'm not that eager to sit down and update my notes from the last race, I think about those years and the feeling I got when I watched somebody doing the job I wanted. And that to me, I guess, was the negative, right? That proved really motivational and now continues to be inspirational to help make sure I do the best job that I possibly can. I'm not sure that's the exact answer you're looking for, and maybe there's a better one that's escaping me, but that's what comes to mind.
Yes, I'll share a quick little story with you.
Sure.
And my main negative experience that happened was when I first started, when I was still a teenager in high school. I started working for this media outlet. I'm not gonna say the name. And at the time, I didn't really know a lot about journalism, so I didn't know how it worked. So yeah, so this person saw me live tweeting the races way back then. I can't believe I've been doing this for like 5 or 6 years now. And then the person asked me if I wanted to join this media outlet, and he was also around the same age as me. So I'm thinking, we're all teenagers, we're all young motorsports fans. We're gonna try to work hard and make it together. And I'm thinking everything's going well at first, and then I wrote an article about Jeff Gordon retiring, and it actually wasn't an article. Honestly, it was just 3 long paragraphs. I didn't really understand what it was like to be a journalist, and at the time, when you're young, sometimes you're hard headed. You don't really understand that you need to sit back, listen, and actually put in the work. And that's something that I really failed to understand at the time. So I wrote those 3 long paragraphs, submitted it to the editor in chief, who was also might have been the same age as me or 1 year older. And he put it in the trash can on WordPress, and without any explanation. And I'm like, what happened? And he said, and he's like, it wasn't good at all. And then I read another article. He put that in the trash too. Didn't even try to give me any advice on how to make it better. And it's safe to say I didn't even last at that outlet for an entire week. I was really frustrated. I didn't like how that person handled business, and watching that person go in and out of the media center over the years in both IndyCar and IMSA. He really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, especially a lot of the veteran journalists in the industry. And guess where he is today? He's no longer a part of the sport. And I really do believe that his attitude is the reason why he's out of motorsports journalism today, because that's someone I do not want to be at all. I always want to treat people with a lot of kindness and respect, and basically just be me, because I cannot be a person who treats others that way.
Yeah, I would follow up. You had asked about advice earlier, and the best thing you could do is just be happy, be friendly, be nice to people. Don't give them a reason to say no to you, right? And you're right. You know, people with that kind of personality ultimately won't stick around, because eventually, if someone's looking for an excuse to get rid of them, well, you know, that comes up nice and quick. And I think what I found is you can get away with maybe not being quite as talented as somebody else if you're easy to work with, right? And that's not to say you can continue in the business just by being nice. If you don't have the skills to do the job, you'll be out as well. But, you know, being nice to people goes a long way, and it does help insulate you from some disappointment, that's for sure. And I also have a suspicion who you might be talking about.
Yes, you might have. Yeah, you might already know who I'm talking about, but I'm not gonna be the type of person to name. Yeah, I'm not the type of person. I'm not gonna say any names, but I just know at the end of the day, if I don't stick and I don't make it, I'd rather not make it and do things the right way rather than make it and basically treat people like dirt and act like I know more than a 30-year veteran motorsports journalist. That's just not who I am. I respect my elders and everyone who comes before me, and I think Ben has one or two more questions to ask you before we wrap up the program for tonight.
Yeah, I know we're getting close on time here, but you know, Ryan, I understand. You know, it's great to see that you've done a little bit of everything here, and I know it's important in the world of journalism to show versatility when you can. But I also want to ask you a little bit about life off the track. I understand you recently ran a karting endurance race. You've maybe done some racing on the side. So I guess if there's a final question for you tonight, who are you away from the racetrack, and what's one fact that most people might not know about you?
Okay. I guess the fact probably is I'm a giant history nerd. In my spare time, I'm reading or listening to things about primarily ancient and then into kind of the medieval era history. I find it fascinating. And so, you know, if I'm out on a run, I'm probably listening to a podcast about ancient Rome or something like that, which I suppose makes me a little bit different than most. But I think that actually going back into racing is one of the reasons that Le Mans and Indy are so exciting to me. Is it's an interesting mesh of my two passions, history and motorsports. The two are totally intertwined with those. And as an aside, my favorite interview that I have ever done was with Ferdinand Habsburg, who's a former open-wheel driver, now primarily a sports car driver, who is the, I think, great-grandson of the final emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and prior to that, the Holy Roman Empire. And it was just like the coolest thing ever. I was totally geeking out about interviewing him. I didn't ask him anything about that, but just knowing, you know, what his family had accomplished over hundreds and hundreds of years, and now here he is as a racing driver, and to have my two passions intertwined in the form of this one person was quite interesting. But as far as things that I do away from work, I have done a little bit of racing. I've been very fortunate in that regard, primarily with my father. It's one thing that we really have bonded over. He's the one that got me into motorsports when I was young. We both have done some Spec Miata racing at the amateur level. I like to go to my indoor karting track. That's about the extent of my karting career, except for this past weekend, I did go to a really cool place out in Norway, Illinois, Concept Hollers Speedway, I think it was called, and got to run in a charity go-kart race. Didn't do all that well, but had a good time with it. And then I got married, as I mentioned, a couple of summers ago, and have two wonderful stepsons, and just love being with them and doing stuff with the family as much as I can. So I'm not sure my life outside of racing is all that interesting, but the family's enough to keep me busy and keep me entertained and also keep me grounded. There's nothing like coming back from covering a major sporting event and maybe starting to think you're a big deal, and the kids are there to make sure that your head doesn't get too big. And I think that's a healthy thing.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned history. That's definitely something that's probably my one regret in high school, that I didn't take my history class a little bit more seriously, because as I've gotten older, I've gotten a much greater appreciation for history, and particularly in the world of motorsports. I love going back and watching old races from before I was even born and reading up about the history about it. So that's the passion that I definitely can say I share.
Awesome. Well, let's swap notes sometime. All right.
Yeah, sounds good. And I think we're going to kick it back to Kobe now to close the show out.
Yeah, and also, Ryan, want to thank you for coming on Life on the Grid tonight. Really excited finally get to meet you virtually. And I promise someday virtually is going to become in person. I'll finally see you at the racetrack. Really excited for whenever that day is going to be. And once again, just thank you for being here.
Pleasure is mine, guys. Great talking with both of you.
Yeah, we definitely encourage all of our viewers to follow Ryan Myrehn on Twitter at Ryan Myrehn. And also be sure to check out our Patreon page. Really appreciate all of our Patreon supporters. Colin, you've been supporting us for many months now, and our two new Patreon supporters, Mark and D-Shell. Mark, D-Shell, you guys have been really wonderful to my family over the years, and really appreciate you for supporting me here at Grit Network on my new adventure. Also, be sure to check out Paul Bless to get goodies for your furry friend. Now it's time to introduce our musical guest, ending tonight's program with a song titled Way Out by Tough Guy, based out of Portland, Oregon. I'm Kobe Lambeth from the Podium Finish signing off. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful evening and enjoy the wonderful music.